Hey guys, Christiana here, and I'm in the Card Player Studios with Alec Torelli, also known as Trejejo online. And you are on a hot run. You just won 2 Festa Al Lago preliminary events. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, today we're talking about strategy, and I figured the best thing to talk to you about would be final table play, obviously, since you just took 2 very tough final tables down.
Right.
So when you get to the final table and when you break the final 2 tables down, how do you reassess, and what kind of things are you keeping in mind as everybody's sitting down, like where your position is at the table? What do you think about?
Well, definitely, like, when you go from 2 tables to 1, you always redraw tables and break down the table, and then you randomly redraw positions. So it's really important to know what players are to the left of you and what players are to the right of you, and who you could kind of take advantage of and who's going to be re-raising you. And you got to think about different things and how people are going to react to you in different situations. So I take these things into account, and then that adjusts the types of hands I play from different positions. Like, for example, if I know someone behind me is going to be re-raising a lot, then I'll have to be tighter because, you know, they're gonna punish my open raises. So if they're not going to be, then I could punish their blinds and just steal their blinds all the time. So that's definitely one thing to take into account, like, and then also to stay out of the good players' way and stuff like that, you know.
Okay, so when you get back into a full table, and if you come in as a big stack, what's your strategy when there are probably like 3 or 4 players who are shorter stacked? Do you really put pressure on them, or you kind of sit back a little bit?
That's a good question. Well, it depends on each individual player, because some of the short stacks are really tight and they're trying to move up in money. Mm-hmm. So they would wait for other stacks to go out. So if you notice this trend from them, from past experiences and playing with them earlier and stuff like that, or if you talk to people and they you know, whatever, then you could punish them too. You could be raising them a lot because they're only going to wait for premium type hands before they commit a lot of chips or their whole stack. Whereas other short stacks are going to be really aggressive, as everyone has different styles when they're short. You know, some people like advocate being really aggressive, and those players, every time you raise, they're just going to go all in, and then you have to fold. Mm-hmm. So for those players, you got to really tone down and know which players. The key element is knowing who's doing what and what the difference is, and then you got to adjust your strategy accordingly. So generally, I think a lot of short stacks perhaps play too tight. So in general, if I have to say like one or the other, I would be more aggressive in that situation.
Well, what if you have 2 short stacks in the blinds and you have a big stack and you raise because you're in late position? If you have a weak hand, do you normally fold, knowing that if they go all in, you'll have to call, or do you still apply pressure because, you know, being in late position with those short stacks in the blinds only comes around a few times?
Right,
so.
Not that often. Yeah, if wait, you're saying if I raise and they go all in, I have to call?
Yeah,
because I'm priced in?
If their stack is so that you
right,
would have
that I would have to call with.
Do you just pass with marginal hands? Or
yeah,
you
a lot of
pressure?
times there I would pass because I know they're going to be likely, especially like I said, if they're going to be very likely to shove, go all in with like a lot of the types of hands they can have, say like 50% of the random holdings that they would be dealt at this spot, then yeah, I would fold, because a lot of times you're going to be priced in because they're going to have so many different hands that you could be priced in against, and you know you're only going to win like 1 out of 3 times. And so like it's correct to be priced in, but at the same time you're only winning 1 out of 3 times, which isn't good for your overall situation. So a lot of times in that spot I feel like it's just better to fold because to avoid these marginal spots.
Okay.
There would be some obviously extreme cases if they were really tight, and then I would just do it, and then the few times that they decided to go all in, I would just call and be like, well, this very rarely happens, so it's, you know, really profitable to do, but most of the time probably give it up there.
Yeah, I know that's a lot of problems that players have is when they have a big stack and they have a ton of short stacks. They want to keep being aggressive, but if they keep getting shoved on, they're still losing a bunch of their stacks. So I know.
Yeah, and then oftentimes they're forced into these marginal spots where they have to run the deck, and then, you know, they're not likely to win because you know they're going to be behind and priced in to call, and then, you know, it winds up, you know, being bad for them.
What about when you have a big stack and another good player has a very large stack? Do you tend to play big pots and use your stack against them, or do you try and stay out of each other's way?
That actually happened in the second tournament. I was I forgot the guy's name, but I was to the left of him. Mm-hmm. So I would be punishing him a lot because we were both the 2 biggest stacks at the table. Mm-hmm. But because I was in position on him, like he was sitting where you were and I was here, and there was, you know, the whole table. Every time when he would raise, I would re-raise him a lot because at that point he's either having to commit his entire stack or he has to fold. And so he's thinking like, hey, I'm first or second in chips, and I don't want to like be in a huge pot against this guy to my left that's the other big stack who's also a good player. So a lot of times, most of the time, he would just fold unless he had a really good hand. And so I would punish him a lot when he opened there, especially because he was raising a lot. But if he's to my left, which he was before we broke from 2 tables to 1 table, I would be very tight because he would do the same thing to me, and he's smart enough to know to do that as well. So in that situation, the most important thing is your position on the other big stack.
Okay. Now, when you were in position and he was raising, when you decided to try and re-steal from him, what kind of hands did you have? I mean, knowing that in order for him to call, he would have to have a pretty premium hand. So what kind of hands would you re-steal with him, knowing that if he did call?
Yeah. So in that situation, my hand would be a little more irrelevant because I'm just playing off how he's going to play based on what I do. So if I know that I re-raise him with like any 2 cards, his range for continuing is going to be the same. Right. He still has to have those big hands.
Right.
So essentially, it doesn't really matter that much what I have.
Right.
I mean, so I would generally just like, I wouldn't do it every time, because if you do it every time, of course he's going to just go all in against you. So like, I would just do it, 1 out of every other time he opened, or every 3rd time he opened, so that there is still the possibility that you could have a big hand, because you've been very tight throughout the rest of the game, and you re-raise him like, once every 2 or 3 rounds. He's not going to just automatically think, hey, this guy's doing it with any 2 cards. Whereas if you do it every time, of course, so mainly it's not exactly what you have that's as important as the frequency in which you're doing it. Okay. And also your image at the table relative to the rest of the players. Like, for example, I was being very tight when I wouldn't raise a lot of pots pre-flop, but when he raised, I would re-raise. So he's like thinking to himself, or like I would think he was thinking to himself, like, hey, this guy's been really tight. He hasn't been raising at all, and now he re-raises me. Like, I'm not gonna.
Strong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm also the other big stack at the table, and like, of course, it's gonna cross his mind. Like, he's smart enough to know that I'm not gonna always have a big hand there, but at the same time, given the information he's given, like, I've been really tight and I haven't been like doing anything crazy out of line. I don't think he's just gonna like put his whole stack in that given spot. So it's mainly the frequency at which you're doing it rather than like your specific holding. Like, it's not that much better if you have like Queen 4 diamonds rather than 6 7 offsuit. Like, I would do it with both of them, but it's mainly just like the timing and the frequency.
Okay. At which point do you really need to open up your game as players go out? Like, would you say like 6-handed you start to get super aggressive, or is it before that or after that?
It's about right around there. It's 6 or 5-handed. It also depends a lot. I keep saying this too, on the players at the table and like who's behind you and what spots you can be aggressive. Because sometimes it's just, even though it's shorter handed, the stacks and the players don't dictate that certain amount of aggression, because that you're going to get punished for opening a lot. But generally, when it gets 4 or 5-handed, I mean, there's half as many people as when you started, so you're going to have to play basically twice as many hands, especially because the blinds are coming around more, and you're essentially always in like late position. Like, if the first guy folds, you're on the cutoff or the button, you're always in late position. So of course you're going to have to expand your hands in your range a lot there.
Where do you see players making the biggest mistakes when they get short-handed at the final table that you could take advantage of? What mistakes are people making? Are they playing too tight, or calling re-raises out of position, or what's the biggest problem? Because I know a lot of people, they always get there. They always get like 5-handed.
Yeah, and then like, capitalizing on the win is the tough part. I think probably they play too tight with a shorter stack, because people are going to be opening a lot. Like I said earlier, you're always in late position if there's 4 or 5 people left. So people are going to be raising a decent amount, and like if you're that short stack, you got to get in there and gamble. Like, you got to be willing to put chips in. You got to make steals. If it goes like a raise and a call, the range of hands that you go all in with has to be like semi-decent. You can't just only wait for premium hands. So you got to open up your range a little bit, and you got to be putting more aggressive on people that are raising you, because they're going to be raising your blind a lot, knowing that it's a big pay jump from 4th to 3rd probably, and so everyone's kind of waiting back for you to bust, and you can't just wait back for someone to bust because you're that person that everyone else is waiting for. So you got to make the move, and you got to take the initiative. And I mean, at that point, you don't really have much to lose. You're the shortest stack anyway. You're like favorite to go out in 4th, so you got to take a chance to win. And I'm not really concerned with moving up in pay jump, because like winning was my only really concern. So that having that in mind and playing with that attitude is important.
That's definitely a good point. Now, in those 2 tournaments you won, when you got 3-handed, what kind of stack did you have compared to the other 2 players in each of the tournaments?
I think when we got 3-handed, the first one, we were all about even, like pretty close to even.
How were your stacks relative to the blinds in that first tournament?
We had about like 30 times the blind,
okay.
or 30 times, which is pretty decent for a tournament that is only a day long, or barely 2 days long. And one of the players busted very quickly the first time when we were three-handed. So when John and I got heads up, we actually each had like 40 or 50 times the blind, which was huge at that point. And the blinds jumped up once, and then that was it for the rest of the tournament. So we were pretty deep when we got to three-handed and heads-up play. And the second tournament as well, I forgot who we got three-handed with. But I remember when we got heads-up, we were about the same as the first day.
Okay.
We got heads up right as the blinds went up, and we had about 30 times the big blind each. So we played heads up for a while the second day too. So we had pretty good stacks.
Okay. When you get three-handed and you're even stacked, like you said, with about 30 big blinds, how often would you say you're raising on the button? Because I mean, everybody's raising on the button probably
Right.
three-handed. So do you have to stay in the tournament? Like, what if you keep getting super bad cards on the button?
Yeah, and that's something that's tough too. The other option that people don't always consider is you could limp on the button too. And sometimes, like a lot of times, if you limp on the button, like people just call the small blind or fold, and then like they check you and you bet the flop and they fold, which I did a few times three-handed, or at least tried to. But with those stack sizes, when you're like essentially pretty deep, I don't feel like people are going to be raising you a lot when you open the button. They're going to either call and then try to see a flop and hit a hand and then put their stack in, or if they have a big hand, they're going to re-raise you. So I think most of the time in that spot, if the players are going to play tight against me when I raise from the button, or just fold because, for example, say 2 out of 3 of us are like, or the other guy thinks I'm good and I think he's good, and then there's another player that's not as good. If I'm the one on the button, I mean, I think he's going to get out of my way to wait to play a hand with the other guy. So if I, taking that into consideration, then if I think I could get heads up in position with just one caller against the big blind, who I don't think is, as strong of a player, then I'm going to be happy to be raising the button in that spot.
Okay.
Whereas, if I have someone in the big blind that's just going to re-raise me every hand, then of course you're going to have to be a little more tight. But I think if you're not getting many cards, then it's not always bad to fold either, because the times you do raise, you're not going to necessarily have good cards. And if you fold the button when it's on you, then the next time you raise, they can't just be raising you with nothing, because they already took into account that you folded the button last time. So they're like, okay, well, he's playing semi-tight, or he's playing reasonable, not just opening every hand. So that's also not as bad for you too when you do take the passive route and fold.
Okay. All right, now let's talk about heads up play. You're obviously a super good heads up player. I mean, you got second in the WSOP $10,000 buy-in event, and then you beat Jonathan Little heads up, who's a tough player in himself. So what's your edge heads up, and what do you think makes your game so effective?
Well, I mean, heads up's like something that's always been really fun for me. I started playing like heads up like 3 years ago when it wasn't that popular, and I really worked at it really hard, and I talked a lot with like some of the other players that were like the best players, the most winning players at the time. I just continually work at it. I mean, I work at it really hard, and I think it's one of the most fun aspects of poker. And that makes it easier for me too, because if you enjoy doing it, it's a lot easier to do. And just the hands I've put in, I've put in like millions and millions of hands heads up, and so it's it's going to pay off for me. Whereas a lot of other people that not Jonathan, or not to say him or name anyone, but like just people that play tournaments generally don't get that much experience in heads up play, because they're not playing heads up cash games and stuff like that. So the only time they get experience in heads up is when they get deep in a tournament, which it just is not going to be the amount of experience I've had. So I think that's just generally what it comes down to, and just working hard at it and thinking about it and talking with players that you seemingly think are really good, and just practice.
What was the most effective thing that you did against Little, do you think? Or do you not want to give it away, since you might get heads up with him again?
No, I don't know if there's any one thing, really. It's just, it was a battle, and I got in some good spots, and I was just told myself generally, I guess biggest guideline I told myself is I'm not going to let him run me over, because I would be raising the button, and he would just re-raise all in, and he was just running me over, doing this like countless and countless times. So I started folding the button more, and raising the button with like slightly stronger hands, and hands that I could, withstand a re-raise from or call an all-in with. And eventually he stopped re-raising as much because he saw me start to fold. And I would also check-raise a lot of flops, whether I hit a hand or not. But I think the main thing is just like knowing how he's going to play against you. Like if I raise the button and see him re-raising me a lot, I can't just like keep raising the button, because he's going to just keep winning. That means he has an edge, because every time he re-raises, I'm just folding. So like, I got to think about a different strategy that's going to counteract what he's doing that gives me an edge over his play. And it's just about like this adjustment game that you play against your opponents and like realizing what they do and then doing something that's like one step ahead of them, so that when they do that, they like fall into your trap instead of you falling into theirs. So I was trying to just constantly think of different things that applied to the game and the match we were playing that could give me an edge over my opponent. And it is tough. Like some opponents, it's going to be very difficult against, especially him, because he has a lot of experience and he's really good and he's been in that situation before, you know. And so for him, it's going to be harder, and I got to think more. But I just, you know, tried to do what I could, and it worked out for me.
Great. Well, I'm obviously kidding about getting heads up with
Oh,
Jonathan
yeah,
Little
no.
again. What was that crazy statistic that I read in your blog about what the chances are that you would actually get heads up?
I think it was something like 28 million to 1.
So crazy.
But you know what the craziest part was that someone told me this afterwards when I was in Niagara last week. They said that the same player got 6th both tournaments in a row too.
Oh yeah, and none.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I know him well
The chances
too.
of that
And
too
I was
are
like, geez, that must make it like exponentially higher. And I didn't even take that into consideration, you know. But it was a pretty crazy couple days that we had going on there. It was nuts.
Well, thank you so much for talking about
my pleasure.
taking down a final table, and congratulations on doing it twice at the Festival
Thanks.
Lago. All right, Christy Arnett with Alec Torelli for Card Player TV.